Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets by J.K. Rowling. They set off together down the street. How come you never wrote back to me? Said Hagrid as Harry jogged alongside him. He had to take 3 steps to every stride of Hagrid's enormous boots. Harry explained all about Dobby and the Dursleys. Ruddy muggles, growled Hagrid. If I had known. Harry, over here. Harry looked up and saw Hermione Granger standing at the top of the white light of stamped to Gringotts. She ran down to meet them, her bushy brown hair flying behind her. What happened to your glasses? Hello, Hagrid. Oh, it's wonderful to see you two again. Are you coming into Gringotts, Harry? As soon as I've found the Weasleys, said Harry. You won't have too long to wait, grinned Hagrid. Harry and Hermione looked around. Sprinting up the crowded streets were Ron, Fred, George, Percy, and Mr. Weasley. Harry, Mr. Weasley panted, we hoped you'd only gone one grade too far. He mopped his glistening bald patch. Molly's frantic. She's coming now. Why did you come out? Ron asked. Nocturnally, said Hagrid grimly. Brilliant, said Fred and George together. We've never been allowed in, said Ron enviously. I should really well think not, growled Hagrid. Mrs. Weasley now came galloping into view, her handbag swinging wildly in one hand, Jenny just clinging onto the other. Oh, Harry, oh, my dear, you could have been anywhere. Gasping for breath, she pulled a large clothes brush out of her bag and began sweeping off the soot Hagrid hasn't managed to beat away. Mr. Weasley took Harry's glasses, gave them a tap of his wand, and returned them, good as new. Well, gotta be off, said Hagrid, who was having his hand wrung by Mrs. Weasley. Nocturnally. If you hadn't found him, Hagrid, see you at Hogwarts, and he strode away, head and shoulder taller than anyone else in the packed street. Guess who I saw in Borgin buckets? Harry asked Ron and Hermione as they climbed Gringotts steps. Malfoy and his father. Did Lucius Malfoy buy you anything? Said Mr. Weasley sharply behind them. No, he was selling. So he's worried, said Mr. Weasley with grim satisfaction. Oh, I'd love to get Lucius Malfoy for something. You be careful, Arthur, said Mrs. Weasley sharply as they were ushered into the bank by a bowing goblin at the door. That family's trouble don't go biting off more than you can chew. So you don't think I'm a match for Lucius Malfoy? Said Mr. Weasley indignantly. But he was distracted almost at once by the sight of Hermione's parents, who was standing nervously at the counter that ran all around the great marble hall, waiting for Hermione to introduce them. But you're muggles, said Mr. Weasley delightedly. We must have a drink. That's that you got here? Oh, you changed in muggle money. Molly, look. He pointed excitedly at 10-pound notes in Mrs. Granger's hat. Meet you back there, Ron said to Hermione as the Weasleys and Harry were led off to the underground walls by another Gringotts goblin. The walls were reached by means of small goblin-driven carts that spread along miniature train tracks through the bank's underground tunnels. Harry enjoyed the breakneck journey down to the Weasley's vaults, but it felt dreadful, far worse than he had in Nocturnally. Then it was opened. There was a very small pile of silver sickles inside, and just one gold galleon. Mrs. Weasley fell right into the corners before sweeping the whole lot into her bag. Harry felt even worse when they reached his vault. He tried to block the contents from view as he hastily shoved handfuls of coin into a leather bag. Back outside on the marble steps, the all separated. Percy muttered waggily about needing a new quill. Fred and George had spotted their friends from Hogwarts, Lee Jordan. Mrs. Weasley and Ginny were going to a second-hand robe shop. Mr. Weasley was insisting on taking the Granger off to the Leaky Cauldron for a drink. We'll all meet at Flourish and Blots in an hour to buy your school books, said Mrs. Weasley, setting off with Ginny. And not one step down Nocturne Alley, she shouted at the twins, retreating backs. Harry, Ron, and Hermione strolled off along the winding cobbled street. The bag of gold, silver, and bronze jangling cheerfully in Harry's pocket was clamoring to be spent, so he bought 3 large strawberry and peanut butter ice creams, which they slurped happily as they wandered up the alley, examining the fascinating shop. Examining the fascinating shop windows. Ron gazed longingly at full set of Chudley cannon ropes in the windows of quality Quidditch supplies, until Hermione dragged them off to buy ink and parchment next door. In Gamble and James' Wizarding Joke Shop, they met Fred, George, and Lee Jordan, who was stocking up on Dr. Filibuster's fabulous wet start, though he had fireworks. And in a tiny junk shop full of broken wands, wonky brass skells, and old cloaks covered in potion stains, they found Percy, deeply immersed in a small and deeply boring book called Prefects Who Gained Power. A study of Hogwarts prefects and their later careers, Sloane read along off the black cover. That sounds fascinating. Go away, Percy snapped. Of course, he's very ambitious, Percy. He's got it all planned out. He wants to be Minister of Magic, Ron told Harry and Hermione in an undertone as they left Percy to it. An hour later, they headed for Flourish and Blotts. They were by no means the only ones making their way through the big shop. As they approached it, they saw to their surprise a large crowd jostling outside the doors, trying to get in. The reason for this was proclaimed by a large banner stretched across the upper windows. Gilderoy Lockhart will be signing copies of his autobiography, Magical Me, today, 12:30, 4:30 p.m. We can actually meet him, Hermione squealed. I mean, he's written almost the whole book list. The crowd seemed to be making up mostly of witches around Mrs. Weasley's age. A harassed-looking wizard stood at the door, saying, "Call me, please, ladies." "Don't push there. Mind the books now." Harry, Ron, and Hermione squeezed in inside. A long queue went right to the back of the shop, where Gilderoy Lockhart was signing his books. They each grabbed a copy of Break with a Banshee and sneaked up there to line where the rest of the Weasleys were standing with Mr. and Mrs. Granger. "Oh, there you are, good," said Mrs. Weasley. She sounded breathless and kept patting her hair. "We'll be able to see him in a minute." Gilderoy Lockhart came slowly into view, seated at a table surrounded by large pictures of his own face, all winking and flashing dazzlingly white teeth at the crowd. The real Lockhart was wearing robes of forget-me-not blue, which was exactly matched his eyes. His pointed wizard's hat had sat at a jaunty angle on his wavy hair. A short, irritable-looking man was dancing around, taking photographs with a large bright camera that emitted puffs of purple smoke with every blinding flash. "Out of the way there," he snarled at Ron, moving back to get a better shot. "This is for the Daily Prophet." "Big deal," said Ron, rubbing his foot where the photographer had stepped on it. Gilderoy Lockhart heard him. He looked up, he saw Ron, and then he saw Harry. Then he stared. Then he leaped to his feet and positively shouted, "It can't be Harry Potter!" The crowd parted, whispering excitedly. Lockhart dived forward, seized Harry's arm, and pulled him to the front. The crowd burst into applause. Harry's face burned as Lockhart shook his hand for the photographer, who was clicking away madly, wafting thick smoke over the Weasleys. "Nice big smile, Harry," said Lockhart, though with his own gleaming teeth. "Together you and I are worth the front page." And he finally let go of Harry's hand. Harry could hardly feel his fingers. He tried to settle back over to the Weasleys, but Lockhart threw an arm around his shoulders and clamped him right to the side. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, waving for quiet, "what an extraordinary moment this is. The perfect moment for me to make a little announcement I've been sitting on for some time. When young Harry stepped into Flourish and Blotts today, he only wanted to buy my autobiography, which I shall be happy to present him now, free or charge." The crowd applauded again. "He had no idea," Lockhart continued, giving Harry a little shake that made his glasses slip to the end of his nose, "that he would shortly be getting much, much more than my book. Magical Me. He and his schoolfellows will in fact be getting a real Magical Me. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I have great pleasure and pride in announcing that this September I will be taking up the post of Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The crowd cheered and clapped, and Harry found himself being presented with the entire works of Gilderoy Lockhart. Staggering slightly under the weight, he managed to make his way out of the limelight to the edge of the room, where Ginny was standing next to her new cauldron. "You have these," said Mumble to her, tripping the books into the cauldron. "I'll buy my own." "Bet you loved that, didn't you, Potter?" said a voice Harry had no trouble recognizing. He straightened up and found himself face to face with Draco Malfoy, who was wearing his usual sneer. "Famous Harry Potter," said Malfoy. "Can't even go into a bookshop without making the front page." "Leave him alone." "Leave him alone. He didn't want all that," said Ginny. It was the first time she had spoken in front of Harry. She was glaring at Malfoy. "Potter, you got yourself a girlfriend," drawled Malfoy. Ginny went scarlet as Ron and Hermione fought their way over, both clutching stacks of Lockhart's books. "Oh, it's you," said Ron, looking at Malfoy as he wore something unpleasant on the sole of his shoe. "Bet you're surprised to see Harry here, eh?" "Not as surprised as I am to see you in a shop, Weasley," reported Malfoy. "I suppose your parents will go hungry for a month to pay for that lot." Ron went as red as Ginny. He dropped his books into the cauldron, too, and stared towards Malfoy, but Harry and Hermione grabbed the back of his jacket. "Run!" said Mr. Weasley, struggling over with Fred and George. "What are you doing? It's mad in here. Let's go outside." Well, Arthur Weasley." It was Mr. Malfoy. He stood with his hand on Draco's shoulder, sneering in just the same way. "Lucius," said Mr. Weasley, nodding coldly. "Busy time at the Ministry, I heard," said Malfoy. "All those rates. I hope they're paying you overtime." He reached into Ginny's cauldron and exacted from Admice the glossy Lockhart books, a very old, very battered copy of A Beginner Guide to Transfiguration. "Obviously not," he said. "Dear me, what's the use of being a disgrace to the name of wizard if they don't even pay you well for it?" Mr. Weasley flushed darker than either Ron and Ginny. "We have a very different idea of what a disgrace is the name of wizard, Malfoy," he said. "Clearly," said Mr. Malfoy, spelled eyes straight to Mr. and Mrs. Granger, who were watching apprehensively. "The company you keep, Weasley, and I thought your family could sink no lower." There was a thud of metal as Jenny's cauldron went flying. Mr. Weasley had thrown himself at Mr. Malfoy, knocking him backwards into a bookshelf. Dozens of heavy spellbooks came thundering down on their heads. There was a yell of "Get him, Dad!" from Fred and George. Mrs. Weasley was shrieking. "No, Arthur, no!" The crowd stamped backwards, knocking more shelves over. "Gentlemen, please, please!" cried the assistants, and then, louder than all, "Break it up! There, gents, break it up!" Hagrid was wandering towards them, though, of sea books, and in an instant he had pulled Mr. Weasley and Mr. Malfoy apart. Mr. Weasley had a cut lip, and Mr. Malfoy had been hit in the eye by an encyclopedia of toadstools. He was still holding Ginny's old Transfiguration book. He thrust it at her, his eyes glittering with malice. "Here, girl, take your book. It's the best your father can give you." Putting himself out of Hagrid's grip, he beckoned to Draco and swept from the shop. "You should have ignored him, Arthur," said Hagrid, almost lifting Mr. Weasley off his feet as he strained at his ropes. "Ron and her to the core, the whole family. Everyone knows that. No Malfoy's worth listening to. Bad blood. What is it? Come on now, let's get out of here." The assistant looked as though he wanted to stop them leaving, but he barely came up to Hagrid's waist and seemed to think better of it. They hurried up the street, the Grangers shaken with fright and Mrs. Weasley beside herself with a fury. "A fine example to say to your children, brawling in public. What Gilderoy Lockhart must have thought." "He was pleased," said Fred. "Didn't you hear him as we were leaving? He was asking that bloke from the Daily Prophet if he'd be able to walk to the fight after his report. Said it was all publicity." But it was a subdued group who headed back to the fireside in the leaky cauldron, where Harry, the Weasleys, and all their shopping would have been traveling back to the Barrow using flu powder. They said goodbye to the Grangers, who went leaving the pub for the Muggle Street on the other side. Mr. Weasley started to asked them how bus stop worked, but stopped quickly at the look on Mrs. Weasley's face. Harry took off his glasses and put them safely in his pocket before helping himself to Floo powder. It definitely wasn't his favorite way to travel.